Sometimes it hits you in the quietest moments. Late at night, lights off, phone face down. Nothing bad happened today, nothing dramatic. And still, there's that familiar heaviness in your chest, a sense that something is missing. Not something you can name, just a feeling you have lived with for as long as you can remember. You might call it loneliness, but that is not quite right. You have people, you talk, you function, you laugh at the right moments. Yet deep down, there is this strange knowing that you learned how to be alone very early. Not physically, emotionally. And you never stopped. You notice it when someone asks how you are, and you give the short answer. Not because you are hiding something dramatic, but because explaining yourself feels pointless. You notice it when you feel overwhelmed, but your instinct is to withdraw instead of reach out. When comfort feels unfamiliar. When being seen feels more dangerous than being misunderstood. You might not have words for it. You just know that needing someone feels heavy, like a risk you learned not to take. This is the pattern no one taught you to recognize. Growing up emotionally alone does not always look like neglect in the obvious sense. There may have been food, a roof, school, maybe even love in its own way. But emotional presence is something else. It is being met when you are confused, being mirrored when you feel too much, being held, not just physically, but internally. When that doesn't happen consistently, something quiet forms inside you. You learn that your inner world is something you must manage alone, that your feelings are inconvenient, invisible, or simply not important enough to slow anyone down. So, you adapt. You become observant. You read rooms. You sense shifts in tone before words are spoken. You get good at self-control, at minimizing your needs, at not taking up too much space. You might even become the strong one, the independent one, the one who doesn't ask for help. And people admire you for it. What they do not see is that this strength was built out of necessity, not choice. When you grow up without emotional attunement, your nervous system learns something very specific. It learns that connection is unpredictable, that safety comes from self-reliance, that vulnerability has a cost. So, you internalize a quiet rule. If I don't need too much, I won't be disappointed. If I handle things myself, I won't be abandoned. If I stay composed, I won't be a burden. This is not a belief you consciously chose. It was shaped through repetition. Moments where you reached out and nothing came back. Moments where your emotions were brushed aside, minimized, or misunderstood. Moments where you learned that it was easier to stop expecting. Over time, your system adjusted. You stopped reaching. You stopped waiting. You stopped hoping. And that became normal. As an adult, this shows up in subtle ways. You might feel deeply, but rarely express it in real time. Your emotions come later, in private, in your head, in your body, in the quiet. You might struggle to ask for support even when you need it, not because you think you don't deserve it, but because the idea feels foreign, awkward, unsafe. You might be drawn to relationships where you are needed more than you are nurtured, where you give stability, listening, understanding, but feel strangely alone even when you are not alone. You might downplay your pain automatically, tell yourself it's not that bad, others have it worse. You might feel uncomfortable when someone tries to care for you, not because you don't want it, but because your system doesn't know how to receive it without tension. There can be a constant low-level alertness, a sense that you are responsible for yourself at all times, that if you drop the ball, no one is coming to catch it. And when someone does show up emotionally, it can feel confusing. Part of you relaxes, another part braces. You may wonder how long it will last, what the cost will be, when it will disappear. This is the conflict of growing up emotionally alone. The very patterns that protected you now make intimacy complicated. Your independence kept you safe. Your self-containment kept you functioning. Your emotional distance kept you from repeated disappointment. These were intelligent adaptations, but they come with a quiet grief. Because somewhere along the way, you learned to survive without being witnessed, and survival is not the same as being known. There is often a deep tiredness that comes with this history, not physical exhaustion, emotional fatigue. Carrying yourself for so long, holding your inner world without support, being your own container again and again. You might feel like rest is always conditional, that even in calm moments you are still on guard. And you might wonder why closeness feels both desired and threatening, why craving connection pull away when it gets real, why being understood feels like relief and exposure at the same time. This is where compassion matters. Not the kind that tells you to change, but the kind that notices. Because nothing about this pattern is a flaw. It is a record of what you lived through, a map of how your nervous system learned to stay intact. Awareness doesn't mean forcing yourself to open up. It doesn't mean becoming different overnight. It starts much quieter than that. It starts with recognizing that your difficulty with closeness is not coldness, that your independence is not arrogance, that your emotional distance is not a lack of depth. It is history. It is memory stored in the body. It is a younger version of you who learned that being alone was safer than being let down. When you begin to see this, something softens. You might start to notice the moment you shut down, the moment you say you're fine when you're not, the moment you withdraw instead of reach. Not to judge it, just to see it. You might feel sadness for the child who had to grow up faster than they should have, who learned to self-regulate without guidance, who became capable because they had no other choice. And you might feel something else too, a quiet permission. Permission to move slowly. Permission to not have everything figured out. Permission to acknowledge that emotional aloneness left marks. Healing here is not about fixing yourself. It's about allowing space where there used to be silence. About letting your inner world exist without immediately managing it. About letting feelings pass through without being minimized or dismissed. Sometimes that means sitting with discomfort. Sometimes it means letting yourself want something, even if you're not sure how to receive it yet. You don't have to rush toward connection. Your system will not respond to force. Trust builds the same way safety was once lost, through small, repeated experiences of being met. Even noticing your own feelings with gentleness is a form of connection, one you may not have been taught. And maybe that's the quiet realization waiting underneath all of this, that you were never broken, you were adapting. That the loneliness you feel is not because you are incapable of closeness, but because you learned to survive without it. And survival was never meant to be permanent. You are allowed to take your time, to feel conflicted, to want closeness and fear it in the same breath. That tension makes sense, and you don't have to resolve it tonight, or name it perfectly, or do anything with it at all. Sometimes, the most meaningful shift is simply recognizing yourself in the story, letting that recognition sit, letting it breathe, knowing that emotional aloneness shaped you, but it doesn't have to define the rest of your life. And for a moment, that knowing is enough.